here. Here we go. So, in response to Louisiana's legislature mandating that every public school display the Ten Commandments in every classroom, Kurt Vonnegut said once in A Man Without a Country, "For some reason, the most vocal Christians among us never mention the Beatitudes from Matthew chapter 5. But often with tears in their eyes, they demand that the Ten Commandments be posted in public buildings. Of course, that's Moses, not Jesus. I haven't heard one of them demand that the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, be posted anywhere. Blessed are the merciful in a courtroom. Blessed are the peacemakers in the Pentagon. Give me a break." End quote. So I grew up Lutheran, Christian, heard about the Beatitudes a million times, Sermon on the Mount, Jesus did it, it was a big thing. And until this opportunity, I thought, I'm not even sure I know what the word beatitude means. It's just a thing. Jesus did it like it's a table or a couch or something. It's a thing. I'm like, well, it's got to be more than that. So I actually looked it up. Beatitude comes, of course, from the Latin, and it actually means perfect, exalted happiness or supreme blessedness. So I think what the Beatitudes are trying to say, these people that are doing these things are working towards perfect, exalted happiness, supreme blessedness. Okay, so now I know what Beatitude sort of means. But what does it mean to be poor in spirit? I always kind of thought they were sick when I was a kid. But it actually means humble, or a mourner in this case, meek, righteous, merciful, pure in heart. I think the only one that I really understand completely right out of the get-go was peacemaker. It's pretty obvious what a peacemaker is. And then where is this kingdom of heaven that was talked about? Well, Eric Simpson in Huffington Post, which is now HuffPost, in September of 2012 wrote this article, "The Beatitudes are essential and relevant today." And he says this: "The kingdom of God refers to creating heaven on earth, or beloved community. It's a list of characteristics and behaviors to which humans should aspire to create the beloved community," which he goes on to say, which was very much the essence and the lifeblood of the ancient and original Christian communities before it became the religion of the empire. The Beatitudes, he goes on to say, have intense significance in a world where many Christians want to change others and the world from the top down through forced conformity rather than genuine conversion. The Beatitudes express the idea that peace comes from peacemakers who are characterized by their poverty of spirit, their ability to mourn for the world, their lack of attachments or clinging to personal rights, their hunger for healing the world, and their extreme mercy extended towards even their worst enemies, and of course, their purity of heart. Peacemakers, according to Jesus, are the instruments who bring peace to the world because they exemplify these characteristics. Change comes from inside and moves out towards the external. Peacemakers are persecuted because they present a challenge to authority, which compels from the outside but cannot penetrate the interior. Unquote. So for those of you that were around when I did the first sermon, and I'm sorry about the scheduling of how this all worked out, it was in mid-June when I first did the first half of this book. I know it's a cliffhanger, right? You've been waiting all summer. Let me remind you of a couple of things. The term beloved community was frequently used by Martin Luther King Jr., but he never did a sermon, he never did a speech where he unpacked what exactly he meant by that. So there are a few things that people have surmised from his use of it, that it's a vision of total interrelatedness, the solidarity of all humans living within a collective destiny. And he says it needs to have unconditional, or he uses the Greek term agape, love, that applies to all. There's no measurement of whether you're worthy or unworthy of love. And then he famously believed that nonviolence was the key towards building such a community. Well, after his death, Coretta Scott King actually wrote a little essay on here's what Martin Luther King Jr. meant by beloved community. Problems and conflicts exist, but are resolved peacefully and without bitterness. Caring and compassion drive political policies. Wow, that's a switch. That support worldwide elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. Beloved community is a state of mind, of heart, a spirit of hope and goodwill that transcends all boundaries and barriers and embraces all creation, centered on reconciliation. So that's kind of the background, some definitions of beloved community and definition of Beatitudes. So the second part of Taylor's book, it's part 3 in his book, is called the Beatitudes of Beloved Community. That's why I'm putting so much emphasis on this today. Quickly, his first part, he was making the case for why Martin Luther King's idea of beloved community still should hold. Don't give up on it, just re-energize it. His second part was all about, well, what are all the stumbling blocks that get in the way? And if you recall, I read you some 5 myths that kind of come out of that. Manifest destiny, America's better than everybody else, America can do whatever we want, and we're innocent because we're doing it for the right reasons kind of thing. And oh, by the way, God ordained this at the beginning of creation. Those myths. So those are in the book. And then that part ended with reclaiming patriotism. And his lament that why do only the super religious conservatives or just politically conservatives own the American flag, for example. And there was a quote from Charles de Gaulle about patriotism versus nationalism. And patriotism is when you put the love of your people above all else. And nationalism was when you put the hatred of all others above your people. So there's kind of a difference there. And I kind of paraphrased the quote. But I said at that sermon, I wish, I gave you a little example of cute little Jimmy putting up and down the flag when he was young and very proud of it. And I don't anymore because I'm afraid of, I don't know what I'm afraid of. So I said, I'm going to see if I can come up with an alternative. It took me a while, and I found this on Etsy. So those of you at home, I'm not sure that you could see it on the front table here. But it's a flag that's Make Americans Kind Again, and then goes into some things that are both in the book and just sort of common sense. There we go. Oops. We're going on a roller coaster ride today, folks. That's okay. We'll show it to you later. And so I thought it was a great flag. Unfortunately, I think it was created by somebody where English isn't their first language. So the last bar is tucked under. It says about hatred. And I think they meant abolish hatred. So I'm not sure that I'm actually going to really use it other than for these sermons. But it's the right idea, reclaiming patriotism. So let me just give you a recap of the book. I think the final part of the book, the Beatitudes of Beloved Community. Taylor's kind of all over the place in these last 5 chapters, 6 chapters. And what he's really trying to do, I figured out, is he's saying this is a beatitude, a blessing of something. And I'm either going to give you a concept that we all can do, or I'm going to tell you about some very specific things that are going on in the world where there are these kind of peacemakers that are going to help us usher in this beloved community. Excuse me. So the first one is the Beatitude of Equality, the blessing of equality. And he goes to talk about the Imago Dei imperative, in which basically it begins with the truly new and radical narrative of inherited worth that should be tied to Imago Dei. For those of you that your Latin is a little rusty, it means the image of God or the image of the divine. So it's seeing the image of divine in everyone as a foundational conviction, which is foundational in both Judaism and Christianity. And then understanding equality from a spiritual and religious vantage point. He says, Imago Dei means the spark and image of the divine lies within every person. Thus, when we stare into the eyes of another person, we are staring not only into divine creation, but into divinity itself. So therefore, when we oppress or treat another person with contempt or hate, we reject and denigrate the divine. He ends the whole chapter with, if we truly internalized and believed and acted upon the belief that all people are made in the image and likeness of the sacred, I'll call it that, we would be intolerant of ways in which punishment and privilege are tied to the color of a person's skin, their gender, or other aspects of their identity. The Imago Dei belief put into practice provides the moral foundation on which the beloved community is built. And then he asks a question. Every chapter he seems to ask a question. Believing and living out this Imago Dei requires us to ask, how much are you willing to sacrifice for full freedom and justice across the whole country? In other words, how much are you willing to do so that Imago Dei can be seen and affirmed in everyone? Because this is essential to truly building beloved community. So he starts with that, the blessing of moving those of us who would be able to do that are helping to do it, bring in beloved community. The next one is the beatitude of radical welcome, which I think we know a lot about here. And this is this outstretched light. It's a commitment rooted in the injunction found throughout the Hebrew Bible to welcome the migrant, often referred to as the stranger, and then echoed into the gospel teachings of Jesus. So this, he goes to this radical welcoming. We talk about it at the congregational level. He's talking about the national level, and of course his example is the border conflict. What are we going to do? How are we going to resolve this? How would you do it if you truly were a beloved community? And he asks this question, will we embrace the border wall or the Statue of Liberty as the symbol that defines our nation's moral posture towards immigration? Which symbol fulfills our deepest religious and civic values? Will our nation again be known for having an open door to the world's most persecuted and oppressed people? Chapter 11 is the beatitude of Ubuntu, which is sourced from African Bantu language, and it means interdependence. Of course, we all know the United States was founded on the principle of independence, and it remains the cornerstone of our cultural identity. I mean, come on, July 4th is called Independence Day for a reason, right? There's not a lot of talk about interdependence, at least culturally. It's not usually cited as a cornerstone, but it is what binds us together from a moral and a practical sense. Taylor talks about the major threats then to interdependence that's making it fall apart. The obvious one, he goes on and on about global climate change, but then he puts poverty up there in equal stature with global climate change, picking up on Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. He says there should be a new approach to three core commitments: encouraging greater proximity with people living in poverty. Kudos to the fellowship for moving to this part of town when you had the choice. Building consensus and momentum around evidence-based, comprehensive policies that can often transcend the left-right divide. That's a lot of la to say, you know, there are people out there that are really smart and know what works and doesn't work, and could we stop politicizing and just get to work and do it? And then the third one is reframing and correcting the narrative around poverty to ignite greater empathy and moral urgency. And so he says, Ubuntu interdependence teaches us that our nation's health is inextricably linked to the thriving of all people. In particular, it teaches us that when the most vulnerable thrive, we all thrive. When one part of America suffers, all parts suffer with it. And when one part rejoices, all parts rejoice with it. The next one, chapter 12, is the beatitude of prioritizing nonviolence. He gives us a great Martin Luther King Jr. quote. In the guilt and confusion confronting our society, violence only adds to the chaos. It deepens the brutality of the oppressor, and it increases the bitterness of the oppressed. Violence is the antithesis of creativity and wholeness. It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. And so Taylor, who was part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, when he was growing up in the 1960s, gives us a quote from their founding statement as a conclusion to the chapter. Through nonviolence, courage replaces fear, love transcends hate, acceptance dissipates prejudice, hope ends despair, faith reconciles doubt, peace dominates war, mutual regards cancel enmity, justice for all overthrows injustice, and the redemptive community supersedes immoral social systems. The beloved community requires this kind of moral clarity and resolve, with a commitment to nonviolence at the center. Chapter 13 is the Beatitude of Environmental Stewardship. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because all three of my fellowships that I serve are really into environmental stewardship. I think you know all about it. But there is one example that I found very fascinating. He lifts up a sermon by a Baptist minister from his church called I Can't Breathe by the Reverend Howard John Wesley of Alfred Street Baptist Church outside of Washington, D.C. Basically took the quote from Eric Garner originally and later repeated by George Floyd, I can't breathe, and says that in the same way that's what the earth is doing. Every tsunami, Wesley said, should remind us of the words I can't breathe. The hurricanes such as Katrina and Harvey, we hear I can't breathe. Many from our black communities have cried I can't breathe. The planet is hollering I can't breathe. It's a great and poignant example. A beatitude of environmental stewardship must be completely integrated with an understanding of environmental racism and a commitment to environmental justice, not just the environment. He finally says, as we adjust our lives to create positive change to our climate, we will be changed for the better, including our economies, our way of life, and how we care for our neighbors, our community, and our planet. As we build the beloved community to steward the planet and better the world, the beloved community builds us. Chapter 14, it's the Beatitude of Dignity for All. Basically, he points to one grand example of world leaders with this new vision. It's called Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Some people are nodding their heads. I hadn't heard about it. It's a global agenda of leaders in almost every country around the world, centered on 17 goals and 169 targets. So it's very audacious, I have to say, but at least leaders know about it, pay attention. They want to end extreme poverty by 2030, protect the environment, address climate change, combat inequality, promote peace, and improve governance. So it's a cornerstone. I guess his point in writing this in here is it's not just all of us doing the everyday stuff, but pointing out that there are world leaders at the top levels that are trying to pay attention as well. And then finally, chapter 15 is the Beatitude of Revitalizing and Reinventing Democracy. And he kind of repeats some themes from earlier in the book. He says, historically, religious organizations stayed out of the messiness of politics. But the religious right changed all that and has clouded the separation of church and state. But Taylor argues the country would not benefit from a religious left either. Per the message that I gave in June, he said, quote, religious organizations should serve as the state's conscience, holding all sides accountable to faith-inspired values. Then he goes on to cite a study by the Fetzer Institute, the study of spirituality, which basically says when they're spiritually driven folks, they have these very strong pro-social behaviors. And he sees an indication that spiritually engaged people are a hopeful start to revitalizing our democracy right now. He says, while many forces are undermining our democracy, our voices, our activism, and our votes represent both the antidote and a renewable resource for revitalizing democracy. These are essential to exercising our civic discipleship and upholding the biblical mandate to restrain evil and advance the common good. By revitalizing and reinventing our democracy, we can even the playing field and enable the beloved community to flourish. And I have a footnote here. I started writing this back in May and early June, when the political landscape looked quite different than it does right now. And it just seems like there's this surge of people that are hopeful again and very spiritually, if I can use that word, engaged in this election. And that's it. My mood is completely different than when I started writing this, and that's a good thing. So I just want to summarize. He's got a lot of stuff. Thank you for bearing with me and letting you give you a highlight of each of the chapter over 2 different Sundays. And he's a Baptist minister, liberal Baptist minister, who runs an ecumenical group. Ecumenical means inter-Christian, not interfaith. So a lot of the concepts and terms that he uses in the book are Christian-based. So those of you that read it, that was one of the criticisms, but it makes sense for who he thought his audience was. So at the end of the book, I decided to say, I'm going to Unitarian Universalize this. So I'm giving you the Reverend Jim Coakley Beatitudes of Beloved Community, reimagined a la Taylor. Blessed are those who celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture and experience with inherent dignity and worth. Blessed are those who create diverse multicultural communities where all thrive and flourish. Blessed are those who humbly and reverently honor the interdependent web of all existence and their role in healing and in sustaining right relations. Blessed are the peacemakers who resolve conflict through nonviolence and reconciliation. Blessed are those who work towards inclusive democratic processes and against all forms of systemic oppression. Blessed are those who create and sustain beloved community, grounded in unconditional love at the center of their faith. I hope those sound familiar to most of you. I basically lifted the new values that were adopted by the Unitarian Universalist Association and put them into the format of the Beatitudes. Our centuries-old theology and ethical history and tradition have led us, I think, to this very, very moment. The world is calling for us to live into our values and principles, and frankly, to be co-creators of Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of beloved community. We are already well on our way. The things that Taylor was talking about in the book and introducing to people, we've established in our bylaws. We can't give up, and instead should really double down. We know the way, and with others as our partners, and with great pride and patriotism, we will help build the bridge to America, a beloved community, and peace and love to all of us on the challenging journey ahead. Amen.